So here is where we, start using the channel mixer on, maybe some more complex like colors, so that when, if you look at this tomato, it has some red in it, some green, and then like, maybe a little darker bits like that are kind of grayish. But this is not just a simple color like the sneakers we first introduced channel mixer into. So if we look at the breakdown of these colors again, I can kind of like hide things, hide the channels in here, and you can see, okay, cyan, this level of gray, there's cyan all around here, there's none here because that's like white, and then the stem, there's a lot of it, right? So the stem is like really this dark green. And then when I go to like magenta, there's some magenta again, it's kind of like into the back a little bit. So that's actually mixing with some of that cyan, so there is some in that green. Again, this highlight is largely, no color in there. And then yellow, when I go to yellow, it's like, okay, this is like almost 100% black, so there's like 100% yellow in like all these spots that are really, dark. And then even in here, there's a lot of yellow, right? Probably like 80% yellow or something, just judging by that gray. And then looking at the black, there's a little bit of black in here. Like I said, you kind of saw there was some grayness in that original image. So again, this is just like gauging what you're starting with. So I'm going to go back to this, and I already have a selection made. I'm going to add a channel mixer. And again, I know just before I make any changes, I can always look at these thumbnails and, just kind of looking at it. And you'll get used to like looking at these smaller thumbnails, I think, unless your eyesight is really bad, which mine isn't great, to be honest, but I still kind of have a good idea of how to use this, even just this small thumbnail, to see how much of these CMYK breakdowns are in each image. So I have a ton of yellow, a little bit of magenta, a little bit of cyan, and even a hint of black. But if I want to change this tomato to red, and again, I've already created my channel mixer layer here, but I'm going to go onto the actual adjustment part of the layer, not the mask. But if I want this to be red, I don't want any cyan in it. So I know like a really nice red tomato probably doesn't have too much cyan in it. Maybe it has a little bit of green, but for my purpose, I am going to go to the cyan output channel, and I'm going to take out any cyan that's in here. And automatically that's making it this kind of orangey, yellowish color, which is fine. And again, remember that yellow slider had the most information. So when I want to add colors, that's a good slider to add it from. But again, there's other information in there that might be a little bit, polluting the colors. So we'll go back and we'll fix those manually too. So again, like this is actually nice. There are tomatoes that are this color. So maybe, you're happy with this color, and, you leave it at that. But I wanted a red tomato, so I am going to magenta now, because I know that magenta and yellow make up red for the most part. And I'm going to add magenta, again, going to the magenta output channel. And remember, starting off, the yellow slider had a ton of information, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this slider and just add a bunch of information. And that actually looks really realistic. It almost looks as if this tomato was naturally red. Like you can't even tell that this was a green tomato. And I'm just going to turn this on and off just so you can see where we came from. So I have ripened this green unripe tomato with my channel mixer layer. And again, this is a fairly easy image, because even though there is some other colors that were in there to start with, it mostly was green. So I know going from green to red, I want to remove cyan and then add magenta. So that's a pretty easy color change. But if I want, I can go in and I can go into, like back into the cyan and see if adding that does anything to it. Okay, so now you can see it like makes it a little less ripe looking, right? And I'm just gonna hit Command Z, but all I did was add a little cyan back into it, and maybe added just a little bit and not as much, just 13%. And you can see even that makes it look kind of like, again, like it's just a little less ripe. So if I Command Z out of that, but I'm going to go back to magenta, because even though I added magenta through that yellow slider and got it up to 54, just getting it to 54 got a pretty good red there. But if I go past that, you can see it gets even redder. And then if I start adding some magenta into those smaller bits, like where the black and the cyan are, it'll pump that up even more. You know, you can see like just really getting deep reds in here. And that's like, you know, simply like, again, a simple color change. But how you can really take each part of these like subtle bits in here and change those to what you want them to be. So I am going to just move on to the next part, which is just changing like a bottle color. So I have this nice whiskey, you know, amber liquid in here, and I've already created a selection of that, and I included the reflection in here just because it's kind of, you know, picking up some of that yellow tinge from the liquid there. So I'm going to add my channel mixer, and again, once I have a selection, anytime I have a selection, when I add an adjustment layer, it's automatically going to mask that adjustment layer into the selection I just made, so it only affects that part of the image. And then I go to channel mixer here, and let's say I want to make this liquid blue. Again, I'll go to channels, and you can see, okay, just looking at this liquid again, I'm going to zoom in here just so you can see there's this liquid is almost all yellow, 100% yellow. It has some magenta here, although the middle where that like highlight is doesn't have magenta, and then the edges, like parts of like the glass where there's maybe like shading, it has some cyan and some black in it. So again, knowing yellow is a color I can work with. If I want this to be blue, honestly, yellow will probably be one of the first colors I get rid of. And maybe I'll bring a little yellow back at the end, but I'm just going to go to the yellow output channel, drag yellow down, and now I have this kind of very pink looking liquid. And I'll probably take a little of that out too. So I'm going to go to magenta, and I'm going to take some magenta out from the magenta slider. You know, and again, like, I think the blue that I want might have some magenta in it, so I'm not going to take it down to 0. But I want to add cyan now, so I'm going to go to the cyan output channel here. And again, yellow, the yellow slider was like 100% black when I started. Obviously, it's different now because I've changed all the colors, so I don't really need this cheat anymore. But that yellow slider did have a lot of information to begin with, so if I just add, you know, cyan via this yellow slider, you can see it really does a good job at pumping up all this like liquid color. And now, you know, I don't know how dark I want this, but I noticed there's still a little too much magenta polluting that. So I'm going to go back to magenta, and maybe I'm just going to pull that down to 0. And what I'm going to do instead is add some magenta into the cyan bits, which had, you know, really like less of an area. So you can see when I add it there, it really darkens up those like shadows, and it looks much more natural. And then even if I go back to cyan, and let's say I take down that yellow a little bit because I want to have more of a lighter highlight. Again, I had some magenta information I can add that to also. So I'm using that magenta slider again under the cyan output channel. I'm only adding cyan no matter which one of these sliders. I'm only adding or subtracting cyan. But when I add it into that magenta, I'm going to turn this off because, as you can remember, that magenta channel actually had like that highlight bit preserved in the middle. So now if I want to keep that highlight, I'm just, you know, adding through that slider instead, and that will preserve that kind of highlight in the middle. And then I have this nice blue liquid, and you know, again, you can make it whatever color you want. If I wanted it to be purple, you know, then I can go back and add magenta, you know, and maybe take out some of that cyan I put in there in the first place. You know, it really doesn't matter what color you want to make it. You just kind of have to do the calculations of the CMYK values in your head. What am I starting with? You know, okay, that was 100% yellow, 30% cyan, 30% magenta, whatever you're starting with. You know the colors that you're starting with. Subtract whichever color doesn't belong in the new color that you're trying to get to, and then add those colors, you know, and you do that all via the output channels, okay? So I'm going to hide that, and I'm just going to show you one last thing with Channel Mixer, which will kind of throw a loop into this. So generally speaking, we're dealing with these sliders because that's the information we start with, right? If I go again to my thumbnails here, you can see that this cloth texture is like a ton of cyan, you know, and these darker bits, some magenta, some yellow, some black, and then it has these lighter bits of color here too, which are, you know, probably either some gray in here, so there's some cyan. But I don't always just have to work with these colors. I can add colors, right? So let's say, you know, let's say I'm dealing with like, you know, a blue color like this, and I want to just add colors without worrying about, you know, what is in what channel, I can use a constant slider to add it. So let's say I want to add some magenta. I'm going to go to magenta output channel and watch what happens. I could obviously add it through cyan, and that will preserve, you know, the texture and everything will be perfect. But if I want to put like just a magenta tint over everything, including these like middle areas, if I add it from the constant slider, watch what happens. You see, like, that magenta is actually going even in these lighter areas, whereas when I do it from the cyan channel, it's pretty much only adding it to the darker areas and maybe subtly adding it to those middle areas. So, you know, this is a way where if you take like a solid colored image and you want to mess around with it, you can start adding things like, let's say I go to my yellow output channel and I pull up the yellow slider. Now again, overall it's making it look green because I had you know, yellow in the file to start with, but let's say now I know that that cyan channel is these darker bits. If I take yellow out of that, this overall constant, you know, it added yellow to everything, right? There's 83% yellow sitting on top of this. That's basically like if I filled a layer with yellow and had it on an 83% multiply. That's basically what everything would look like. But because this tool is so great, you can actually affect different portions of the image just by using the information you knew was there in the beginning. So remember, I'm going to just go back to turning this off so you can see that cyan, all these darker like colors was like really like had a lot of cyan built in it. So going back and turning this back on, now knowing that I want to subtract yellow, like if I want these bits to go back to being like a bluish color while this yellowish color is staying in the middle, I'm going to subtract that from the cyan, and you can see, you know, again, now I have the cyan here, but this yellowish color remains in the middle. And I'm going to turn this on and off just so you can see that yellow tint. So you can do unexpected things with textures now, and I'm going to even pump this up even more just so it really ridicules the point, and drag the cyan down even more. So you can create these really interesting multicolored textures just from something as simple as like what seemingly was a solid color to begin with. And it all really matters like which channels you have to begin with and what information is there to how you're going to change it. But that it just really makes it so much more advanced and so much more powerful because you can really do these complex colors with it. And again, you know, you can experiment with any of them. It didn't have to be, I can just go back to the beginning. It didn't have to be yellow. I could have done it with magenta too, right? If I pulled the constant up and made that really magenta, and then again, knowing that I want to take that magenta out of the blue or whatever, I take it out of the cyan, and now I have this really interesting magenta, like kind of blue combo going on. And again, you can play around with all these values and get it to a point you really like it. Maybe you go to some black. There's a lot of black in there. You can take some black out, go back to cyan, maybe even add like a little bit in some spots or whatever. But again, this is great because you can really make some unexpected things with these colors in this more advanced way of thinking about Channel Mixer. And that's it for now. We might dive into like, you know, when you're starting with a lot of different colors rather than just one color where this is overall blue, there might be another more complex, even more complex Channel Mixer tutorial in the future. But for now, I think this is a great start, these first two.